Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Against the Great Reset, 18 Theses Contra the New World Order, by Michael Walsh, narrated by John Mclain. Publisher's note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to charts present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Part 1. The Problem. Introduction. Reset This, by Michael Walsh. What is the Great Reset, and why should we care? In the midst of a tumultuous medical societal breakdown, likely engineered by the Chinese Communist Party and abetted by America's National Institutes of Health gain-of-function financial assistance to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, why is the Swiss-based World Economic Forum, WEF, advocating a complete reimagining of the Western world's social, economic, and moral structures? And why now? What are its aspirations, prescriptions, and proscriptions, and how will it prospectively affect us? It's a question that the men and women of the WEF are hoping you won't ask. This book seeks to supply the answers. It has ample historical precedents, from Demosthenes' fulminations against Philip II of Macedon, Alexander's father, Cicero's Philippics denouncing Mark Antony, the heretic-hunting Tertullian's Adversus Martionem, and philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's Nietzsche contra Wagner. Weighty historical issues are often best debated promptly when something can yet be done about them. In the meantime, historians of the future can at least understand the issues as the participants themselves saw and experienced them. Whether the formerly free world of the Western democracies will succumb to the paternalistic totalitarianism of the oligarchical resetters remains to be seen, but this is our attempt to stop it. So great is mankind's perpetual dissatisfaction with its present circumstances, whatever they may be, that the urge to make the world anew is as old as recorded history. Eve fell under the serpent's spell, and with the plucking of an apple sought to improve her life in the Garden of Eden by becoming, in Milton's words, as gods, knowing both good and evil as they know. The forbidden fruit was a gift she shared with Adam. How well that turned out has been the history of the human race ever since. High aspirations, disastrous results. The expulsion from the garden, however, has not discouraged others from trying. Indeed, the entire chronicle of Western civilization is best regarded as a never-ending and ineluctable struggle for cultural and political superiority, most often expressed militarily, since that is how humans generally decide matters, but extending to all things both spiritual and physical. Dissatisfaction with the status quo may not be universal. Timeless and static Asian cultures, such as China's, have had it imposed upon them by external Western forces, including the British and the Marxist-Leninists. But it has been a hallmark of the Occident and its steady civilizational churn that dates back at least to Homer, Plato, Aeschylus, Herodotus, Pericles, and Alexander the Great, with whom Western history properly begins. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, essaying the inelegant koine, or demotic, Greek of the New Testament in Beyond Good and Evil, observed, Es ist eine Feinheit, dass Gott Griechisch lernte, als Schriftsteller werden wollte, und dass es nicht besser lernte. It's a particular refinement that God learned Greek when he wanted to become a writer, and that he didn't learn it better. Nietzsche, the preacher's son who became, through sheer willpower, a dedicated atheist, was poking fun at the fundamentalist belief that the Christian scriptures were the literal words of God himself. Muslims, of course, believe the same thing about the Quran, except more so. If something as elemental, as essential to Western thought as the authenticity of the Bible, not to mention God's linguistic ability, could be questioned and even mocked, then everything was on the table, including, in Nietzsche's case, God himself. With the death of God, or of a God, Nietzsche sought liberation from the moral jujitsu of Jesus, that weakness was strength, that victimhood was noble, that renunciation of love, sex, power, ambition was the highest form of attainment. That Nietzsche's rejection of God was accompanied by his rejection of Richard Wagner, whose music dramas are based on the moral elevation of rejection, is not coincidental. The great figures of the 19th century, including Darwin and Marx, all born within a few years of each other, were not only revolutionaries, but embodied within themselves antithetical forces that somehow evolved into great Hegelian syntheses of human striving, with which we still grapple today. Wagner, the Schopenhauerian atheist who staggered back to Christianity, and the anti-Semite who engaged the Jew Hermann Levi as the only man who could conduct his final ode to Christian transfiguration, Parsifal. Charles Darwin, ticketed for an Anglican parsonage, but mutating into the author of On the Origin of Species, The Descent of Man, and all the way to The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms. Karl Marx, the scion of rabbis, whose father converted to Lutheranism, and like Wagner for a time, a stateless rebel, who preached that the withering away of the state itself was inevitable. And yet the state endures, however battered it may be at the moment. It's fitting that the Great Reset of Capitalism is the brainchild of the WEF, which hosts an annual conference in the Alpine village of Davos, the site of the tuberculosis sanatorium to which the naïf Hans Castorp reports at the beginning of Thomas Mann's masterpiece, The Magic Mountain. Der Zauberberg, 1924. The title might also be translated as The Enchanted Mountain, which is perhaps more descriptive and evocative of the novel's mood. Planning to visit a sick cousin for 3 weeks, he ends up staying for 7 years, progressing from healthy individual to patient himself, as his perception of time slows and nearly stops. Castorp's personal purgatory ends only when he rouses himself to leave, his Bildungsreise, journey of education, complete, upon the outbreak of World War I, in which we assume he will meet the death, random and senseless, that he has been so studiously avoiding, yet simultaneously courting, at the Berghof. Central Europe, it seems, is where the internal contradictions of Western civilization are both born and, like Martin Luther at Eisleben, go home to die. And this is where the latest synthetic attempt to replace God with his conqueror, man, has emerged. In the village of Davos, in the canton of Graubünden, Switzerland, the site of the annual meeting of the WEF, led by the German-born engineer and economist Klaus Schwab, born in Ravensburg in 1938, the year before Hitler and Stalin began carving up Poland and the Baltics. Ah, but carving things up is so last century. Hitler may have proclaimed the New World Order back in 1941 with all Neuropa at his feet, in W.E.B. Du Bois's famous neologism, written that same year in the Journal of Negro Education, a phrase and sentiment echoed by George Herbert Walker Bush's inarticulation of the same concept just short of half a century later. But today's benevolent progressives, the bastard offspring of Mrs. Jellyby and Sir Oswald Mosley via the British royal family, Prince Charles, a title without a job, is of course fully on board with the reset, with contributing DNA from Rousseau, Marx, and Alinsky, have bigger fish to fry. In an age of atheism and disbelief, note the religious fervor of neo- and cultural Marxism, and the messianic quality of Schwab's anti-humanistic Great Reset. If the God of Abraham is dead, and the Judeo-Greco-Roman Christ, however transitionally triumphant during 2 millennia of Christianity, reduced to a sacred avatar of weakness and failure, what is there left but man? Man the accident, man the despoiler, man the biological sport, man the intruder. Wagner, in his Bühnenweihfestspiel, sacred stage play, Parsifal, hailed die Erlösung dem Erlöser, the redemption of the Redeemer. The negation of the negation become a transfiguring positive. But who is this Redeemer? The incarnation of Scripture's second coming, bringing a glorious end to the human comedy? Or the worm Ouroboros, forever devouring its tail? If we have reached the end of history, the final casting off of the Rousseauvian Marxist chains of the clergy and the bourgeoisie, what future prospect stands before us? Caspar David Friedrich's Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog is the German romantic pictorial epitome of the conundrum of existence: to admire the view or jump. The wild, smoky mountain we have climbed affords us a breathtaking vista, but atop it we find not a quantum of solace, but yet another higher peak. And who dwells atop that Olympus? The oldest gods in the Western canon, Zeus and company? Or is it, still far from heaven, the realm of Mephisto and his damnable Walpurgisnacht? Between the Homeric Greeks and the German Romantics, a walk through Goethe's house in Weimar illustrates the cultural cord that binds Germany's greatest poet and Greece's. What is there for us moderns to discuss or argue that the 19th century has not bequeathed? Our Jewish, Christian, Islamic faiths, however derivative of each other and originating in nearly the same place, are both complementary and antagonistic, affording us thousands of years of contention and disputation. But it was Nietzsche and his fellow Central European intellectual radicals, operating on high emotions, who demanded that we imagine a world altogether devoid of them. Thus do we come back to man. In the motion picture 2001: A Space Odyssey, 1968, writer Arthur C. Clarke and director Stanley Kubrick envisioned the transition from ape to man, beginning not with the discovery of fire, much less the notion of a deity, but adumbrating the biblical Samson with the jawbone of a felled animal, thus identifying essential human nature with war and weaponry. The black monolith that subsequently appears is neither Pallas Athena nor the burning bush, bent on matters martial or the imposition of arbitrary moral and dietary strictures. Indeed, it demands neither fealty nor fidelity and threatens no punishment. In its impersonal, irresistible attraction, it resembles nothing so more than Goethe's apotheosis at the end of Faust Part II, the pull of the life-giving, eternal feminine principle that draws us ever forward, das ewig Weibliche. Alexander Pope, the great 18th century poet, philosopher, and translator of Homer, famously remarked in An Essay on Man, 1733 and 34, that the proper study of mankind is man. What precedes that line, however, is also of contextual interest. Know then thyself, presume not God to scan, the proper study of mankind is man. Pope wrote just half a century short of the French Revolution, which elevated man and dethroned both Louis XVI and God himself, in a land that had been for more than 1,200 years the eldest daughter of the Church. In so doing, the French propelled Europe headlong, or headless as the case may be, into the calamitous 19th century. Pace historian Barbara Tuchman and her essential study, A Distant Mirror, The Calamitous 14th Century, 1978. The 19th century outdid even its illustrious forebear half a millennium earlier in both triumph and tragedy. Perhaps the language Schwab and his Kameraden habitually use in describing their ambitious project offers us a clue to its origins and their intentions, as in this excerpt from the WEF's Great Reset website. The COVID-19 crisis and the political, economic, and social disruptions it has caused is fundamentally changing the traditional context for decision-making. The inconsistencies, inadequacies, and contradictions of multiple systems, from health and financial to energy and education, are more exposed than ever amidst a global context of concern for lives, livelihoods, and the planet. Leaders find themselves at a historic crossroads, managing short-term pressures against medium and long-term uncertainties. As we enter a unique window of opportunity to shape the recovery, this initiative will offer insights to help inform all those determining the future state of global relations, the direction of national economies, the priorities of societies, the nature of business models, and the management of a global commons. Drawing from the vision and vast expertise of the leaders engaged across the forum's communities, the Great Reset Initiative has a set of dimensions to build a new social contract that honors the dignity of every human being. The viper tongue of totalitarianism is most often bathed in palliatives before it strikes. Appeals to the social contract take us at once back to Rousseau, abandoning the 5 bastard infants he had with his mistress, Thérèse Levasseur. As it happens, one of Boswell's round-heeled conquests as well, on the steps of the nearest foundling hospital. The idea of contradictions instantly transports us to the great freeloader, Marx himself, and the internal contradictions of capitalism, while the words fundamentally, communities, and opportunity evoke the still potent shade of former President Barack Obama, a disciple of Saul Alinsky. With such a powerful threat to Anglo-Western notions of individual liberty and personal freedom emerging again from the bowels of Central Europe, the time has come no longer to simply stand athwart, but to combat the Hunnish Marxist tide, as we have had to do at least since 1870 and 1871 and the Franco-Prussian War. Once more into the breach, then, behold the present volume. In commissioning 16 of the best, most persuasive, and most potent thinkers and writers from around the world to contribute to our joint venture, my principal concern has been to offer multiple analyses of the WEF's nostrums, and in so doing, to go poet Wallace Stevens' 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird a few better. Then again, given the surname of the WEF's chief, perhaps a better, more potent literary citation might be Margaret's little ditty from the Buchner-Alban-Berg expressionist opera Wozzeck, 1925. In Schwabenland, da mag ich nicht. I don't want to go to Schwabland. Nor, as Hans Castorp's journey illustrates, should anyone wish to visit Davos land, if he prizes his freedom, his possessions, and his sanity. To the great resetters, we are all ill, all future patients in waiting, all in dire need of a drastic corrective regimen to cure what ails us. In these chapters, we shall examine the Great Reset from the top down. The eminent American historian Victor Davis Hanson begins our survey with The Great Regression, locating Schwab's vision within its proper historical context. He is followed by Canada's Conrad Black and America's Michael Anton and their views of capitalism and socialism, with not a few attacks on conventional osmotic wisdom that will both surprise and enthrall. Britain's Martin Hutchinson outlines the contours of the Reset's anti-industrial revolution, even as the American economist David Goldman confronts both Schwab's notion of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and China's eminentizing its eschaton in real time, along with the Red Dragon's commitment to the upending of Western civilization and its own sino-forming of a post-Western world. American writer, editor, and publisher Roger Kimball tackles the implications of a neo-fascist reset in his essay, Sovereignty and the Nation-State, both of which concepts are under attack in the name of equality, its totalitarian successor, equity, and the political consequences of our re-embrace of Rousseauvian concepts as applied to governments. British historian Jeremy Black discusses the misuses toward which the study of history has been and will be put to by the resetters. The late Angelo Codevilla contributes what alas became his final essay, Resetting the Educational Reset, to sound the tocsin about the dangerous left turn of the once vaunted American educational system, now reduced to a shrill, sinistral shell of its former dispassionate glory. From down under, the Philippines-born Richard Fernandez twins two eternally competing faiths, religion and science. The American-born, Australian-based political sociologist Salvatore Babones contributes a remarkably clear explication of the kinds of transportation feasible under the green energy regimen the reset seeks to impose upon us, and its practical and social implications. Writing from Milan, Alberto Mingardi, the Director General of the Istituto Bruno Leoni, gets to the heart of the Great Reset's deceptive economic program with an essay concerning faux capitalist stakeholder capitalism and its surreptitious replacement of shareholder capitalism in the name of social justice. The Great Reset, however, is not strictly limited to matters financial, pecuniary, or macroeconomic. Social and cultural spheres are of equal importance. James Poulos looks at the reset's unholy relationship with the predatory big tech companies that currently abrogate the First Amendment by acting as governmental censors without actually being commanded by an act of Congress, or, increasingly, an arbitrary presidential mandate. From British Columbia, noted Canadian author and academic Janice Fiamengo weighs in on the destructive effects of feminism upon our shared Western culture, while on the lighter side, Harry Stein examines the history of American humor, which in effect means worldwide humor, and how the leftist takeover of our shared laugh tracks has resulted in a stern Stalinist view of what is and what is not allowed to be funny. The British writer Douglas Murray has a go at the permissible future of realpolitik under the panopticonic supervision of the Reset, the Chinese Communist Party, and the COVID hysterics, while the American journalist John Tierney lays out the road to civilizational serfdom that the unwarranted panic over the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered during its media-fueled run between 2019 and 2022. My contribution, in addition to this introduction, is an examination of the Reset's and, historically, elitist tyrannies' deleterious effects on Western culture, the very thing that gave birth to our notions of morality and freedom. At its heart, the Great Reset is a conceited and self-loathing Central European blitzkrieg against the cultural, intellectual, religious, artistic, physical, and most of all, moral inheritance we have received from our Greco-Roman forebears. This has been latterly shorthanded with the rise of wokeness to white culture. Typically racialist, if not outright racist, the cultural Marxists behind wokeness insist on reducing humanity to its shades of skin color, and then claiming that although all skin colors should achieve in exact same proportions to their share in a given population, some skin colors are better than others, and any skin color is preferable to white. It's a deeply repellent principle that masquerades as a perversion of Jeffersonian democracy, but is in fact a simultaneous attack on individuality and merit that seeks to roll back the scientific and cultural advances of the past 2 millennia, wielding both science and culture as weapons against our shared technological and moral heritage. The goal, as always, is power, the eternal fixation of the socialist left. As Professor Codevilla, to whose memory this book is dedicated, noted in one of his last published essays, totalitarian to Westerners describes a ruler's attempt to exert control over someone's rightful autonomy, regardless of the power grab's success, because we assume that we have rights that natural law forbids be taken from us. Property may be the most obvious of these. Your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are also naturally, inalienably your own. Mussolini first used the term totalitarismo in reference to his boast of everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state, even though his regime's aims were hardly as ambitious as the goals of those who have sought to remake humanity, such as the perpetrators of the French Revolution and those inspired by Marxism-Leninism. We Westerners believe that any uninvited attempt to control what is ours is inherently unlawful and illegitimate. Such power grabs are generally undertaken under a cloak of beneficence, of redemption. Caesar acted on behalf of the people, not the optimates, in provoking the civil war with Pompey in order to save the Republic. His successor, Augustus, eschewed the title of emperor in favor of first citizen, but the Roman Empire in fact began with him. The French Revolution is the beginning of the modern Promethean ideal of political rebirth and renewal, but it ended in the slaughter of both aristocrats and clergymen until it was finally brought to a halt by Napoleon's daring seizure of power in 1799, dubbing himself first consul in an homage to Rome, thus directing the 19th century along the bloody dialectical road to 1914 and into the present day. The goal then, as now, was to make the world anew, a task undertaken once more by the Soviets in 1922 upon their ascension to power in Russia. The French revolutionaries had established a new Year One, starting at the fall equinox and marked by Roman numerals, and although they kept the traditional 12 months, they decimalized them, as well as, briefly, the hours of the day, into 3 10-day weeks, adding extra days as needed at the end of the year to make things come out right. The months themselves got a makeover as well, being renamed, most famously Brumaire, thanks to Marx, in his 1852 essay, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, analogous to the zodiac sign of Scorpio, and Thermidor, thermal, since it ran from July 19th to August 17th, roughly corresponding to Leo. Thermidor didn't last long as a new month, but it did achieve a kind of immortality thanks to the French playwright Victorien Sardou, who in an 1891 drama of that name commemorated the execution of Robespierre. The play, in turn, gave its name to the famous lobster dish. For their part, the Bolsheviks were dead set on creating the new Soviet man, Novy Sovietsky Человек, a Marxist-Leninist Superman who would cast off the Mephistophelian bands of illusion of the West and propagate a new species of physically fit, clear-minded, selfless socialists, fit and bred for the task before them, the triumph of the proletariat and the withering away of the state. Once again, high aspirations, disastrous results. Such siren songs, when briefly heeded, inevitably end with a crash upon the rocks, their irresistible beauties, in reality, strange, impossible hybrids, bare-breasted women with the voices of angels and lower bodies of birds. Think Waterloo in 1815, Berlin in 1945, and Moscow at Christmas 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed in a heap of its own internal contradictions. The fate of Mao's China will be much the same. A nation of intellectual thieves, shameless imitators, dishonest businessmen, and physical cowards is unlikely to withstand any serious engagement with even a decadent and corrupt West temporarily ruled, in accordance with the late Robert Conquest's third law of politics, by a cabal of its enemies. Over the long haul, however, the Western world has proven stubbornly resistant to officially mandated unreality. Not even the prolonged intellectual quackery of Sigmund Freud and his followers, whose science was happily adopted and weaponized by Marxist societies, has been able to shake the Western fondness for dogged empiricism, flights of fancy and fantasy, or more properly the realm of artists, whose material is not the universe, nor even the mind, but the human soul. And soulcraft cannot be written into statecraft, no matter how diligently its proponents try. We, the inheritors of Greco-Roman civilization, have rejected or repelled repeated philosophical, religious, and military incursions from North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, the steppes of Central Asia, and even all-out war with the Empire of Japan. This is not to say we haven't learned from history and often improved ourselves via our syncretic way of accumulating and employing knowledge and insight.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?